My name is Ryan. I guess I should start by saying that, on the surface, everything about my life appeared ideal. I was the guy people envied, a successful career, a beautiful wife, Kiki who turned heads wherever she went, and a house that could easily grace the cover of a magazine. We met in college, where I was majoring in business administration and she was studying fine arts. It was love at first sight for me. Her creativity, her laughter, the way she could make even the most mundane things seem extraordinary. We got married soon after graduation, and for years I thought we were happy. I work in finance, a job that's demanding, but it pays well. I'd wake up early, head to the office, and dive into a sea of numbers, deals, and deadlines. Kiki, on the other hand, chose a different path. She opened a small art gallery downtown, pouring her heart and soul into it. It wasn't always profitable, but she didn't care. Art was her passion, and I admired that about her, or at least I used to. Over the years, I noticed small changes in our relationship. Nothing major, just little things that felt off. Kiki became more distant, spending longer hours at the gallery, coming home late, always with an excuse. She started being on her phone more, guarding it like it held the secret to life itself. At first, I shrugged it off. We've been together for years, after all, and every relationship has its ups and downs. But then, there were those strange phone calls, the ones she'd take in the other room, lowering her voice so I wouldn't hear. When I asked, she always had a reason. Something about a gallery client or a friend who needed advice. I wanted to believe her, and for the most part I did. But doubt had a way of creeping in, whispering ugly thoughts that I tried to push away. One night, I came home earlier than usual, expecting to surprise her. The gallery was closed, and the house was dark. I found her sitting on the couch, her face lit by the glow of her phone screen. She jumped when she saw me, almost like she'd been caught doing something she wasn't supposed to. "You scared me." She laughed it off, quickly locking her phone and setting it aside, but her eyes were nervous, and that made my heart sink a little. "Long day?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. "Yeah, just dealing with some last-minute issues at the gallery," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Her voice was steady, but there was something in her expression, a flicker of guilt, maybe, or was it fear? We didn't talk much that evening. I went to bed early, but sleep didn't come easily. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I just didn't want to admit it. Looking back, I wonder if that was the moment when everything began to fall apart, or if it had started long before and I was just too blind to see it. The days that followed were tense, a gnawing sense of unease settling into my gut. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping through my fingers, something vital that I couldn't quite name. Kiki's behavior didn't help. She became increasingly elusive, her explanations for late nights and missed calls growing vaguer by the day. I tried to ignore it, throwing myself into work as a distraction. But even there, I found it hard to focus. I'd catch myself staring at spreadsheets without really seeing them, my mind drifting back to Kiki, to those small, troubling details that didn't add up. I told myself I was being paranoid, that after all these years, it was ridiculous to question her loyalty. Yet, the doubt persisted, growing like a dark shadow over everything we'd built together. Kiki was always the social one, the life of every party. She'd light up any room she walked into, her laughter infectious, her charm undeniable. It was one of the things that drew me to her in the first place, but now, her social life seemed to take on a life of its own, separate from me. She'd go out with friends more often, sometimes not coming home until well after midnight. When I asked who she'd been with, she'd rattle off a list of names, people I vaguely knew but not well enough to question. One evening, I decided to join her at the gallery. She had an exhibition coming up, and I figured it would be a nice gesture, a way to show support and maybe spend some time together. But when I arrived, the gallery was quiet, the lights dimmed. Kiki wasn't there. One of her assistants mentioned she'd stepped out for a bit, but didn't say where. I waited for an hour, maybe two, but she never returned. Eventually I left, feeling more disconnected from her than ever. Our conversations became stilted, full of half-truths and awkward silences. We were living in the same house, but it was like we were in different worlds. At night, I'd lie next to her, feeling the cold distance between us, wondering when it had gotten this bad. I wanted to talk to her, to ask her outright what was going on. But every time I opened my mouth to speak, the words wouldn't come. Maybe it was fear. Fear of what she might say, fear of what I already knew deep down but couldn't bring myself to confront. One morning, as I was getting ready for work, I noticed her phone on the kitchen counter, buzzing with a new message. She was upstairs, so I hesitated for a moment before picking it up. I knew I shouldn't, that it was an invasion of privacy. But curiosity got the better of me. The message preview on the screen was from someone named Jay, and it was short. "Can't wait to see you tonight." My heart skipped a beat. Jay? I didn't know any Jay. And what was she doing tonight that she hadn't mentioned to me? I felt a flush of anger, but I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just a friend, someone she'd forgotten to mention. But as I put the phone back down, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something more. That day at work was a blur. I couldn't concentrate, my mind racing with possibilities, each one worse than the last. I kept replaying that message in my head, the way she'd been acting, the late nights, the secrecy. I knew I needed to confront her, but I wasn't sure how. Part of me wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation, that I was overreacting. But another part of me, the part that had been gnawing at my insides for weeks, knew that I wasn't. When I got home that evening, Kiki was already there, sitting on the couch with a glass of wine in hand. She smiled when she saw me, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Long day?" she asked, just like she always did. "Yeah, you could say that," I replied, forcing a smile of my own. My heart was pounding, but I needed to play it cool. I couldn't confront her without more proof, without knowing for sure what I was dealing with. We spent the evening in our usual routine, dinner, a bit of TV, then bed. But my mind was elsewhere, replaying that message over and over. Who was Jay? And why did Kiki feel the need to keep him a secret? I knew I had to find out, but I also knew that whatever I discovered could change everything. And once that door was opened, there'd be no going back. The tension between us reached a breaking point that weekend. Kiki had told me she was going out with friends again, the same vague excuse she'd been using more and more often. This time, though, I couldn't let it slide. The name Jay kept circling in my mind, taunting me. I needed answers. She left around 7, looking effortlessly stunning in a dress I'd never seen before. It was a deep red, clinging to her in all the right places. She'd put more effort into her appearance than usual, her hair perfectly styled, makeup done just right. It struck me that this was more than just a casual night out with friends. "Don't wait up," she said with a smile that seemed too sweet, too practiced. I nodded, playing the part of the trusting husband, but inside, the doubt gnawed at me like a relentless parasite. As soon as she was out the door, I felt a surge of determination. I wasn't going to sit around and let this happen. I grabbed my keys and followed her, keeping a safe distance as she drove across town. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white with tension. I didn't know what I was going to find, but I had to know. She pulled into the parking lot of a hotel, one of those upscale places with a bar and lounge that catered to businessmen and travelers passing through the city. I parked far enough away that she wouldn't notice me, and watched as she stepped out of the car, looking around briefly before heading inside. My stomach turned. This wasn't just a night out with friends. I waited a few minutes before getting out of the car, trying to steady my breathing. My heart was pounding, and my palms were slick with sweat. I couldn't believe I was doing this, that I had become the kind of man who would follow his wife to catch her in the act. but I couldn't back down now. I had to see this through. I entered the hotel, the warmth of the lobby contrasting sharply with the cold dread creeping up my spine. I spotted Kiki in the lounge, sitting at a table near the back, her posture relaxed as she sipped on a glass of wine. And there he was, Jay, tall, well-dressed, with an air of confidence that made my blood boil. He was leaning in close to her, saying something that made her laugh, a sound that used to be mine alone. My vision blurred with rage as I watched them, my worst fears unfolding right in front of me. They looked like a couple, comfortable, intimate. Kiki's hand rested casually on his arm, her body angled toward him in a way that spoke volumes. This wasn't some innocent meeting. This was an affair, plain as day. I stood there, rooted to the spot, unable to move or speak. I wanted to storm over, to drag her out of there, to confront them both, but I felt paralyzed, trapped in this nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. My mind raced, thoughts tumbling over each other in a chaotic mess. How long had this been going on? How could she do this to me? To us? As they stood up to leave, Kiki reached into her purse and pulled out a room key, handing it to Jay with a smile that tore me apart. They headed toward the elevators, and I followed at a distance, my heart hammering in my chest. I knew what was going to happen next, but I needed to see it, to confirm the betrayal with my own eyes. They disappeared into the elevator, and I waited, staring at the numbers as they ticked up slowly, floor by floor. My hands trembled as I clenched them into fists, trying to hold back the flood of emotions that threatened to overwhelm me. When the elevator doors finally opened, I stepped inside, my reflection in the mirrored walls barely recognizable, haunted, broken. I didn't know what I was going to do when I reached their floor. Confront them? Scream at her? Beg her to come back? I felt like I was teetering on the edge of a cliff, one step away from falling into a void that I might never climb out of. The elevator came to a stop, and the doors slid open with a soft chime. I stepped out into the hallway, the carpet muffling my footsteps as I walked slowly toward the room number I'd seen on the key card. My breath was shallow, my heart racing with a mix of fear and fury. This was it, the moment that would shatter everything. I reached the door and stood there, listening. I could hear faint voices inside, too indistinct to make out. My hand hovered over the doorknob, trembling, as I fought the urge to burst in and confront them. But then, I heard it, a sound that made my blood run cold. Laughter, followed by the unmistakable creak of a bed. I knew what was happening on the other side of that door. I didn't need to see it. The image of Kiki with Jay, her body entwined with his, burned into my mind, a wound that would never heal. I staggered back, my chest tight with agony, bile rising in my throat. I felt like I was going to be sick, like the world was collapsing around me. I turned and fled, stumbling down the hallway, the walls closing in on me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All I knew was that I had to get out of there, to escape this nightmare that had become my reality. I made it back to my car and collapsed into the driver's seat, gasping for air as the full weight of what I'd just witnessed crashed down on me. Kiki, my wife, the woman I had loved and trusted, was cheating on me. And now, there was no going back. The truth was out, and nothing would ever be the same again. I spent that night in a haze of disbelief and despair. I drove aimlessly through the city, the lights and sounds blurring together, my thoughts spinning out of control. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together, Kiki and Jay, tangled up in each other, betraying everything we had built over the years. It felt like a knife twisting in my gut, the pain so intense it was almost physical. I finally ended up at a bar on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where no one asks questions and the drinks are cheap. I sat at the counter, downing whiskey after whiskey, trying to drown out the images in my head, but it was no use. The alcohol did nothing to numb the pain. It only made the anger burn hotter. How could she do this to me? I kept asking myself that question over and over, but there were no answers, only more rage. I thought about all the years we'd spent together, the memories we'd shared, the plans we'd made. It had all been a lie. She had been lying to me for God knows how long, sneaking around with another man while I was working late, trusting her, loving her. The anger grew, swelling into something darker, something I could barely control. I clenched my fists, feeling the tension in my muscles, the urge to lash out at something, anything, just to release the pressure building inside me. But what could I do? Confronting her seemed pointless. She had already made her choice. She had chosen him. Eventually, I left the bar, the alcohol swirling in my veins, fueling the storm of emotions that threatened to tear me apart. I didn't want to go home, didn't want to face the empty house that would remind me of what I'd lost. But I had nowhere else to go. So I drove back, my mind a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and bitter determination. When I got home, the house was dark and silent, just as I had expected. Kiki wasn't back yet, probably still with him, wrapped up in her lover's arms while I was drowning in the aftermath of her betrayal. The thought made my blood boil, but there was nothing I could do about it. Not yet, anyway. I stumbled inside, barely making it to the kitchen before collapsing into a chair. My mind was racing, filled with thoughts of revenge, of making her pay for what she'd done. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. She had betrayed me, destroyed our marriage, and for that, she would suffer. But how? How could I hurt her as deeply as she had hurt me? The question echoed in my mind as I sat there in the dark, my hands trembling with rage. I thought about confronting her, about screaming at her, demanding answers, but I knew that wouldn't be enough. She deserved more than just words. She deserved to feel the same pain, the same devastation that she had inflicted on me. Then it hit me. The idea was sudden, almost like a flash of clarity amidst the chaos in my mind. Revenge wasn't about shouting or breaking things. It was about control. It was about making her feel powerless, just as I had felt when I discovered the truth. I needed to turn the tables, to make her life a living hell, to strip away everything she held dear until she was left with nothing. My mind began to race, forming a plan, a way to make her pay. I thought about her gallery, her passion for art, and how much it meant to her. I knew she had invested everything into that place, that it was her pride and joy. What if I could take that away from her? What if I could destroy everything she had worked so hard for, just like she had destroyed our marriage? But that wasn't enough. I needed to hit her where it really hurt, to make her realize the full extent of her betrayal. I thought about her friends, the people she surrounded herself with, the life she had built outside of our marriage. If I could turn them against her, make her the outcast, the one everyone whispered about behind her back, then maybe she would understand the pain of being betrayed by those you trust. And then there was Jay. The thought of him made my blood boil all over again. I wanted to hurt him, to make him regret ever laying a hand on my wife. But how? I needed to be smart, to strike at the right moment, in a way that would leave him as broken as I felt. I sat there for hours, the darkness of the house mirroring the darkness of my thoughts. I knew that this path would change me, that once I started down it, there would be no turning back. But I didn't care. I had already lost everything that mattered. The only thing left was revenge. By the time Kiki finally came home, I had made up my mind. I heard the front door creak open, the soft rustle of her footsteps as she moved through the house. She didn't turn on the lights, probably thinking I was asleep. I stayed in the kitchen, hidden in the shadows, listening as she made her way up the stairs to our bedroom. I waited a few minutes, giving her time to settle in. Then I stood up, my resolve hardening with every step. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. She had betrayed me, and now it was time for her to pay. And when I was done, She would know exactly what it felt like to lose everything. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache, the remnants of last night's whiskey still swirling in my system. But the pain in my head was nothing compared to the ache in my chest, the raw, gnawing wound left by Kiki's betrayal. She was already up, moving around the house as if nothing had changed, as if she hadn't spent the night with another man. The sound of her humming in the kitchen grated on my nerves, each note a reminder of the lies she had told, the life she had led behind my back. I stayed in bed for a while, trying to pull myself together, to plan my next move. Last night, in the darkness, I had made a decision. I was going to make her pay. But now, in the harsh light of day, that resolve felt harder to hold on to. I could feel the rage still burning beneath the surface, but it was mixed with something else, something more painful. Grief. Grief for the life I thought we had, for the woman I thought she was. When I finally got up and walked into the kitchen, Kiki greeted me with a smile, her eyes bright and cheerful. It made me sick. I wondered how she could look at me like that, how she could pretend everything was fine when I knew the truth. "Morning," she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "I made eggs, if you're hungry." "Thanks," I muttered, keeping my eyes on the floor. I didn't trust myself to look at her, not without giving something away, not without the anger showing in my face. We ate in silence, the tension between us thick and suffocating. Kiki tried to make small talk, but I barely responded, too focused on keeping my emotions in check. I could see the confusion in her eyes, the way she tilted her head slightly as if trying to figure out what was wrong, but she didn't ask, didn't press the issue. Maybe she was afraid of what she'd hear. After breakfast, she headed to the gallery, and I was left alone in the house. I spent the next few hours pacing, trying to think, trying to calm the storm inside me. But no matter how hard I tried, the rage kept boiling up, threatening to spill over. I needed to act. I needed to do something, anything, to regain control, to start my plan. I grabbed my phone and began making calls, starting with the few contacts I had in the art world. It wasn't much, just a couple of clients I'd met through Kiki over the years, but it was enough to get the ball rolling. I planted seeds of doubt, hints that Kiki's gallery was struggling, that she was becoming unreliable, distracted. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Next, I turned my attention to her friends. I knew a few of them from social events we'd attended together, and I began reaching out, casually mentioning that Kiki seemed distant lately, that I was worried about her. I didn't accuse her of anything outright, that would come later, but I wanted to sow the seeds, to start turning people against her, to isolate her. But the real challenge was Jay. I couldn't just storm into his life and wreck it. He wasn't some random guy. He had connections, power, and I needed to be careful. I spent the afternoon doing some research, digging into his background, looking for anything I could use against him. It was slow going, frustrating, but I knew that if I was patient, I'd find something. Everyone had secrets, and I was determined to uncover his. By the time Kiki came home that evening, I had a plan, at least the beginnings of one. She walked through the door, looking exhausted but satisfied, like she'd had a good day. It made my skin crawl. "How was work?" she asked, dropping her purse on the table and kicking off her shoes. "Fine," I replied, forcing a smile. "Busy, you know how it is." She nodded, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension in the room. I watched her move around the house, pretending to care about the little things she said, the way she laughed at something on TV. But all the while, I was thinking about the steps I'd take, the moves I'd make to bring her world crashing down. We went to bed that night like everything was normal, but as I lay there beside her, listening to the even rhythm of her breathing as she slept, I felt nothing but cold resolve. She was sleeping peacefully, her mind free of guilt, of worry, while mine raced with thoughts of revenge. I wasn't going to let this go. Not now, not ever. She had shattered our marriage, betrayed me in the worst possible way, and she was going to pay. And when I was done, she'd know exactly what it felt like to lose everything she held dear. I closed my eyes, finally drifting off to sleep with a single thought echoing in my mind. This is just the beginning. The days that followed were a carefully orchestrated dance of deception. I continued to go through the motions of daily life, playing the role of the dutiful husband while secretly laying the groundwork for Kiki's downfall. Every smile I gave her, every kiss, every act of affection was a mask, hiding the rage and betrayal festering inside me. Kiki, for her part, seemed none the wiser. She carried on with her routine, spending her days at the gallery, her evenings with friends, and occasionally late nights that I knew now were spent with Jay. It was almost laughable how easily she believed the lie we were living, how she thought I was oblivious to what was really going on. But that was her mistake, underestimating me, thinking she could have her cake and eat it too. I started small, subtle changes that wouldn't immediately raise suspicion. I cut back on the financial support I had always provided for the gallery, citing a few unexpected expenses as the reason. Kiki seemed concerned at first, but accepted it without much fuss, trusting me as she always had. Little did she know that this was only the first step in destabilizing her precious business. Next, I began to plant rumors. A well-placed comment here, a whispered suggestion there, nothing overt, just enough to get people talking. I implied that Kiki was losing focus, that she was more interested in her personal life than in running the gallery. I knew how fragile reputations were in the art world, how quickly whispers could turn into full-blown gossip. And Kiki, with her trusting nature, had no idea that the people she thought were her friends were slowly turning against her. At home, I played my part perfectly. I was attentive, caring even, the model husband. But I kept my distance, emotionally and physically, subtly shifting the dynamic between us. Kiki noticed, of course. She wasn't completely blind. She'd ask if everything was okay, if I was stressed or tired, and I'd give her the same reassuring answers, all the while plotting her demise. But the real challenge was Jay. I knew I needed to be careful with him, that one wrong move could blow everything up in my face. I continued my research, digging into his past, his finances, his business dealings. It wasn't easy. He was smart, careful, but everyone had skeletons in their closet. It was just a matter of time before I found his. One evening, after Kiki had gone out, another girls' night that I knew was a lie, I finally hit pay dirt. I discovered that Jay had a history of questionable business practices, deals that skirted the edge of legality. Nothing concrete, but enough to suggest that he wasn't as clean as he appeared. It was the leverage I needed, the key to bringing him down. I spent the next few days carefully gathering evidence, making sure that when I struck, it would be a fatal blow. I wasn't just going to ruin him, I was going to destroy him, take away everything he valued, just like he had taken my wife from me. By the time the weekend rolled around, I was ready. Kiki was out again, and I knew exactly where she was, at Jay's place, wrapped up in the arms of the man she had chosen over me. But tonight was different. Tonight I was going to take the first step in dismantling their world. I sat at the kitchen table, my laptop open in front of me, my hands steady as I typed out the email. It was a carefully crafted message, sent from an anonymous account, containing all the information I had gathered about Jay's shady dealings. I made sure it was sent to the right people, business associates, clients, even a couple of local journalists who thrived on scandal. I knew that once the email hit their inboxes, it would be like lighting a match in a room full of gasoline. When I hit send, a strange calm washed over me. There was no turning back now. The first shot had been fired, and the fallout was inevitable. I imagined Jay's world unraveling as the rumors started to spread, as people began to question his integrity, his business practices. It would take time, but I was patient. I had nothing but time now. I leaned back in my chair, taking a deep breath, savoring the moment. It wasn't the end, not by a long shot, but it was the beginning of the end for Jay. And for Kiki? Well, she would feel the impact soon enough. When she came home that night, I was already in bed pretending to be asleep. I listened as she moved around the house, her footsteps soft on the carpet, her movements light, almost carefree. It made me sick. How could she be so happy, so content, knowing what she was doing to me, to our marriage? But as I lay there in the dark, a new resolve hardened within me. I had taken the first step, but there was still so much more to do. I was going to take everything from her, her gallery, her friends, her reputation, and when I was done, she would be left with nothing. Kiki might have thought she was living a perfect life, but she was about to find out just how easily that life could be torn apart. And the best part? She wouldn't even see it coming until it was too late. The following week, the wheels of my plan began to turn faster. I could see the first cracks forming in the facade of Kiki's world, though she was blissfully unaware. The whispers in the art community were growing louder, and I could sense the tension in her whenever she spoke about the gallery. She mentioned a few clients pulling out of deals, citing vague concerns about the stability of her business. I played the supportive husband, offering comforting words and suggesting that it was just a temporary setback. Inside, I was reveling in her frustration. At work, I found it increasingly difficult to focus. My thoughts were consumed by the plan, by the revenge that was slowly taking shape. Every time my phone buzzed with a new email or message, my heart raced, wondering if it was news of Jay's downfall. I checked the online forums, news sites, and social media obsessively, looking for any sign that the information I'd leaked was spreading. It didn't take long. By midweek, rumors about Jay's shady dealings had started circulating in the business community. I could see the first signs of his empire crumbling, clients hesitating to close deals, partners backing out of joint ventures. I watched it all from a distance, carefully monitoring the situation, making sure I remained anonymous, invisible. The satisfaction I felt was almost overwhelming, but I knew I couldn't afford to be reckless. I had to stay calm, methodical, to ensure that everything went according to plan. Kiki, meanwhile, was growing more distant. She started spending even more time at the gallery, probably trying to salvage what she could. Our conversations were brief, stilted, as if she sensed something was wrong, but couldn't put her finger on it. She'd ask me how my day was, and I'd give her the same generic response, all the while thinking about how her world was slowly unraveling. That Friday, I decided to take things a step further. I arranged a meeting with a lawyer, someone discreet, someone who specialized in divorce and asset protection. It wasn't that I wanted a divorce, not yet anyway, but I needed to understand my options, to know how best to protect myself when the time came. I wasn't going to let Kiki walk away with half of everything after what she'd done. The lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Claire, was efficient and thorough. She laid out the possibilities, explaining the legal process, how assets could be divided, and what I could do to ensure that I came out on top. She even suggested ways to document Kiki's infidelity, just in case it came to that. I listened carefully, absorbing every detail, knowing that this was another crucial step in the plan. When I got home that evening, Kiki was already there, sitting on the couch with a glass of wine in hand. She looked tired, more worn out than I'd seen her in a long time. It almost made me pause, almost made me reconsider the path I was on. But then I remembered what she had done, the betrayal, the lies, and my resolve hardened once more. "How was your day?" she asked, her voice flat, devoid of its usual warmth. "Busy," I replied, sitting down beside her. "How's the gallery?" She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "It's been rough. A few more clients canceled today. I don't know what's going on, but something's definitely wrong. I'm starting to think maybe I should close it down, at least temporarily." My heart skipped a beat. This was it, the first real sign that my plan was working. But I kept my expression neutral, pretending to consider her words thoughtfully. "Maybe it's just a rough patch," I said, keeping my tone casual. Things will pick up again. They always do. She nodded, though she didn't seem convinced. I hope so. I've put so much into that place, you know? It feels like everything's falling apart, and I don't know why. I had to resist the urge to smile. She had no idea that the man sitting next to her was the reason for her gallery's sudden decline. That I was the one pulling the strings, orchestrating the downfall she was so desperately trying to prevent. We sat there in silence for a while, the tension between us palpable. I could tell she was on edge, that she was struggling with the weight of whatever was happening in her life. But there was no sympathy left in me for her, not anymore. She had made her bed, and now she was going to lie in it. Later that night, after Kiki had gone to bed, I sat in my office, scrolling through the latest updates on Jay. The rumors were spreading like wildfire, and it was clear that his business was starting to suffer. A few news outlets had even picked up the story, though it was still mostly under the radar. But it was only a matter of time before it exploded, before his entire world came crashing down. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. This was just the beginning. Jay's downfall would take time, but I was patient. And as for Kiki, well, she was next. I still had more moves to make, more ways to strip away everything she held dear until she was left with nothing. In the back of my mind, I knew that this path I was on wasn't just destroying her, it was destroying me too. But at that moment, I didn't care. All that mattered was the revenge, the need to make her feel the same pain she had inflicted on me. As I finally closed my laptop and headed to bed, one thought echoed in my mind. The end was near. And when it came, Kiki would know exactly who had orchestrated her downfall. She would see the monster she had created, the man she had turned into this cold, calculating force of destruction, and by then, it would be too late for her to do anything about it. The following week was a strange one. The tension between Kiki and me had become almost unbearable, a thick, choking presence in our home. She was quieter than usual, withdrawn, as if the weight of everything happening at the gallery was pressing down on her. I could see the strain in her face, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she moved through the house like a ghost. It was almost pathetic, watching her crumble under the pressure. Almost. I kept my distance, sticking to my routine, pretending to be the supportive husband while secretly delighting in her misery. At night, I'd lie beside her, feeling her tossing and turning, knowing that the stress was eating her alive. And each morning, I'd wake up with renewed determination, ready to push her further toward the edge. The news about Jay was spreading faster than I'd anticipated. His business was taking a hit, and I heard through the grapevine that a few of his major clients had pulled out of deals. It wouldn't be long before the full extent of the damage became public knowledge, and I couldn't wait to see it unfold. I imagined the look on Kiki's face when she found out, when she realized that her lover's world was crumbling just like hers. I was careful not to rush things, though. I wanted to savor every moment, to make sure that when everything fell apart, it would be complete and total. I continued to spread rumors about the gallery, hinting that Kiki was considering selling it, that she was struggling to keep it afloat. People were starting to talk, and I could see the doubt in Kiki's eyes whenever she mentioned work. She was losing control, and there was nothing she could do about it. One evening, after a particularly long day, Kiki came home looking more defeated than ever. She dropped her bag by the door and slumped onto the couch, her shoulders sagging under the weight of her troubles. I watched her from the kitchen, pretending to be busy with dinner, but really just observing her, studying her like a predator watching its prey. "I don't know what to do, Ryan," she said, after a long silence, her voice small and broken. "The gallery, it's falling apart. I've lost so many clients this week. I don't know how much longer I can keep it going." Her words were like music to my ears, but I kept my expression neutral, careful not to let any of my satisfaction show. "Maybe you should take a break," I suggested, keeping my tone light. "You've been working so hard. Maybe it's time to step back for a bit, let things settle down. She looked up at me, her eyes searching my face for something, reassurance maybe, or a solution that she couldn't see herself. But there was nothing I could offer her, nothing genuine anyway. I can't just give up, she whispered, more to herself than to me. This gallery, it's everything I've worked for. I shrugged, as if it didn't matter to me either way. You have to do what's best for you, Kiki, but sometimes letting go is the best thing you can do. She nodded, though she didn't look convinced. Maybe, she murmured, her gaze distant. Maybe you're right. I left her to stew in her misery, heading to the office under the pretense of catching up on work. But really, I just wanted to be alone, to revel in the knowledge that everything was going according to plan. I sat down at my desk, opening my laptop to check the latest updates on Jay. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. There it was, splashed across the business news sites. A full-blown scandal. Someone had leaked documents detailing Jay's involvement in fraudulent deals, exposing him as a crook. The fallout was swift and brutal. Investors were pulling out, clients were severing ties, and Jay's once thriving business was collapsing around him. I couldn't have asked for a better outcome. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. This was it, the beginning of the end. Jay was finished, and it wouldn't be long before Kiki found out. The thought of her discovering the truth, of realizing that her lover was nothing more than a con artist, filled me with a dark satisfaction. She had chosen him over me, and now she was about to lose everything. But I wasn't done yet. There was still one more move to make, one final blow that would seal her fate. I had been saving it, waiting for the right moment. And now that moment was almost here. The next day, I left work early, telling Kiki that I had a meeting out of town. She barely noticed, too wrapped up in her own problems to question me. I took the opportunity to drive across town, to a small, nondescript office building that housed a private investigator I had hired a few weeks earlier. He was good, discreet, and I had paid him well to dig up everything he could on Kiki and Jay. The investigator greeted me with a nod as I entered his office, handing over a thick envelope. Everything you asked for is in there, he said. Phone records, photos, even a few recordings. It's all pretty damning. I took the envelope, feeling its weight in my hands, knowing that it held the key to my final act of revenge. Good work, I said, slipping him an extra wad of cash as a bonus. He took it with a nod, his expression impassive. He didn't care what I did with the information, he was just doing his job. I left the office and drove to a nearby park, where I sat on a bench and opened the envelope. Inside were pages and pages of evidence, Kiki's phone records showing late-night calls to Jay, photos of them together at the hotel, at his place, even a few candid shots of them in public, looking every bit the happy couple. But it was the recordings that really sealed the deal, conversations between them, intimate and incriminating, proof of their affair that couldn't be denied. I spent hours going through everything, listening to their whispered conversations, their plans, their promises to each other. The rage that had fueled me for so long was now a cold, calculated fury. I wasn't just going to expose them, I was going to destroy them, both of them, in the most public and humiliating way possible. When I got home that evening, Kiki was already in bed, the stress of the day having worn her out. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, watching her sleep, her face peaceful and unaware of the storm that was about to hit. I almost felt a pang of regret, a moment of doubt, but it passed quickly. She had betrayed me, destroyed our marriage, and for that, she would pay. The next morning, I made the final preparations. I compiled all the evidence, neatly organized and ready to be sent to the people who needed to see it, her friends, her clients, even her family. I knew that once they saw what Kiki had been up to, there would be no coming back from it. Her reputation, her career, her life as she knew it would be over. And as for Jay, I was going to make sure his downfall was just as public, just as devastating. I had already sent the incriminating documents to the authorities, but now it was time to make it personal. I crafted an anonymous tip, pointing them directly to Jay's involvement in the fraudulent deals, ensuring that he would face not just public disgrace, but legal consequences as well. When everything was ready, I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of finality settle over me. This was it, the culmination of everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed. I sent the emails one by one, watching as they disappeared into the digital void, knowing that when they resurfaced, they would bring ruin with them. And then, I waited. The end was near, and there was nothing left to do but watch as Kiki's world came crashing down. The storm hit faster than I expected. It began with a single phone call, one that I knew would set the entire chain reaction in motion. Kiki was in the kitchen, making breakfast, when her phone rang. She picked it up, her face immediately turning pale as she listened to the voice on the other end. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I didn't need to. I knew exactly what it was. Her hands started to shake, the phone slipping from her grasp and clattering onto the countertop. She stood there, frozen, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. "No, no, this can't be happening," she whispered, her voice trembling. I watched her from the doorway, my heart pounding, a strange mixture of satisfaction and anticipation coursing through me. "What's wrong?" I asked, feigning concern as I stepped closer, though I already knew the answer. They're saying the gallery. It's ruined," she stammered, her breath hitching. "Clients are pulling out, the reputation. It's all over the news." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral, though inside I was reveling in the chaos. "I'm sure it's just a mistake," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "Maybe there's something you can do to fix it." But Kiki wasn't listening. She grabbed her phone again, frantically scrolling through messages, her face growing paler with each passing second. Her world was crumbling, and she had no idea how to stop it. Every text, every email brought more bad news. Cancellations, accusations, demands for explanations that she couldn't give. It was all falling apart, just as I had planned. By midday, the house was a mess of papers and phones, Kiki desperately trying to salvage what she could. I stayed in the background, offering words of support that meant nothing, knowing that there was no saving her now. I could see the panic in her eyes, the way she was unraveling right before me, and it gave me a sense of power I hadn't felt in a long time. And then came the final blow. A knock on the door, sharp and authoritative. Kiki looked at me, her eyes wide with fear, before rushing to answer it. Two men stood there, police officers, their expressions stern, serious. My heart raced as I listened from the hallway, knowing what was about to happen. "Are you Kiki Dawson?" one of them asked, his voice clipped. "Yes, that's me," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're here regarding Jay Patterson," the officer continued. "We have evidence linking you to fraudulent activities connected to his business. We need you to come with us for questioning." Kiki's knees buckled, and she grabbed the doorframe for support, her face drained of all color. "What? No, I had nothing to do with that," she cried out, her voice cracking. "I don't even know what you're talking about." But the officers didn't waver. They stepped inside, taking her by the arms, leading her out of the house as she protested, her pleas falling on deaf ears. I stood there, watching as they took her away, her eyes wild with terror, her voice fading as she was escorted to the waiting police car. I didn't follow. I just stood there, rooted to the spot, feeling a strange emptiness settle over me as the sound of the sirens faded into the distance. It was done. Kiki was gone, her life in ruins, her world shattered just as she had shattered mine. The plan had worked flawlessly, every piece falling into place exactly as I had intended. But as I stood there in the quiet house, I didn't feel the satisfaction I had expected. The rage, the need for revenge that had driven me for so long was gone, leaving only a hollow void in its place. I had destroyed her, yes, but in doing so, I had destroyed a part of myself as well. The silence was suffocating. I walked through the house, past the scattered papers, the remnants of Kiki's desperate attempts to save what couldn't be saved. It felt surreal, like I was moving through a dream, or maybe a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. I ended up in the kitchen, where Kiki's breakfast still sat untouched on the counter. The eggs had gone cold, the coffee lukewarm. I stared at the mess, the chaos that had consumed our lives, and for the first time, I felt a pang of regret. Not for what I had done, I knew there was no going back, but for the life we had once had, the love that had been real before everything had gone so wrong. I sat down at the table, burying my face in my hands, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I had won, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like I had lost everything, including myself. The house was empty, and so was I. In the end, Kiki was gone, and so was the man I used to be. All that was left was the cold, empty shell of someone who had sacrificed everything for revenge, only to find that it wasn't enough. It never would be. The storm had passed, but it had left nothing but devastation in its wake. And now, all I could do was sit in the wreckage, wondering if there had ever been a way to stop it before it began.